ladies and gentlemen, this is Ben Windsor speaking again. So we've probably had a look and a think about knowledge organisers. What do they look like? What are they for? And in this talk, I'm going to be talking about a little bit more about how to implement them in the class and what that process might look like. Thankfully, school now has a subscription for this fantastic book. It is a 5-step guide to doing a lot of things to do with teaching, namely knowledge organisers in the classroom and how to implement. So we're going to be thinking about how to implement knowledge organisers using some of the advice from walkthroughs by Tom Sherrington and Ollie Caviglioli as well. So what this session is walkthroughs and how to implement knowledge organisers. I'm going to be giving some additional information and ideas to do with the process, what that might look like. Why? We're going to be creating a reflection process. So hopefully if we get this right, this will extend not just to the implementation of knowledge organisers. We can apply this same process to other facets of our teaching practice as well. So some of you are going to be unsurprised to hear me talk about this in these terms, and some of you are probably going to be sick of hearing this phraseology as well. But let's have a look at it. So the way I want to think about this is in 3 main phases. The first phase, I like to think of it like ice. So the first phase is going to melt. So melt is we're taking something that's already solid, our current practice, we're melting it down, we're looking at its core components, think about what we currently do. That's the melt process. The mold process is learning new things and adding those things to our process. We're putting that water back into the ice cube tray to reset our teaching practice. Refreeze is where we figure out how after we've set our practice into a new format, how we're going to keep it that way. So consistency is the key phrase when it comes to the refreeze phase. This into the context of what we're talking about, knowledge organisers. What is it actually going to look like in this 3-phase approach? So melt is we're going to be using walkthroughs in order to help us with our practice. So we've got this book. The school has also bought the subscription, so we'll be able to watch step-by-step videos as well. So we're going to watch the video, go through different steps. We're going to also be thinking about if we do each of these steps, what we can do in the classroom to make sure these steps are fulfilled in order to get the maximum possible efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to using our knowledge organisers in the classroom. So that is our melt. We're going to think about how many of these things we do and add the guidance to our own practice. Once we've assessed what we actually do and what to add to our practice, now comes the point of thinking about how we're going to implement what it is that we have learned. So we're going to be thinking about what is it going to look like in a lesson? What is the process going to be? So where is it going to fit in the lesson? What purpose does that phase of the lesson using knowledge organisers actually have? So that if it would be a good idea to have that phase of the lesson apply later on in the lesson. For example, have the students revise something from the knowledge organiser that is pertinent to the rest of the lesson or the scheme of lessons. Then what we're also going to think about is how this phase of lessons fits into the big picture. How can we implement it in future lessons in order to maximise its efficiency? And then again, it might require for us to go back to the beginning of that process again and think about how it fits back into the lesson once more. So in terms of the mold part of our 3-part methodology to implementing knowledge organisers in the classroom, we're going to use a little bit of walkthroughs here. So the first thing that's really, really important is that you design your knowledge organisers to be quizzable. If you reverse engineer your quizzes from the knowledge organiser, it means that those 2 things go hand in hand. They can use the knowledge organisers to help them check their answers. It also provides a very convenient one-stop shop for all of the terms information that they need to know in order to be successful in the subject. Present the key information you want students to learn in a format that supports self-quizzing. Useful features include tables with columns of related information, bullet point lists of key ideas, sequences shown in flow diagrams, labelled and unlabelled versions of diagrams, clear mind maps or timelines. A key thing here is thinking about how we're going to graphically lay out that information to create something that is visually appealing and it doesn't factor in too much into the increased cognitive load when it comes to interpreting that information. So focus on specific elements. So when you're asking the students to work from the knowledge organisers, you want them to ask them to focus on a certain part, at least to begin with anyway. If you spread the net too wide, you run the risk of missing the point of what it is you're looking at the knowledge organiser for. So typically, knowledge organisers span much more information that can be quizzed on sensibly at any one time. Direct students to read specific elements in advance of any retrieval practice activities. You can also ask them to transform that information. So they read the information and then change the format of it. If you've got bullet points on the knowledge organizer, you might ask them to turn it into a mind map. If you've got a mind map, you might ask them to turn it into a Cornell note. So ultimately, we're limited by our own imagination. Highlight how this fits into a bigger schema. Quizzing should support building connections rather than isolating facts so that they lose meaning. The whole point of this is that we strengthen the schema in the student's mind. If the students have a good degree of fingertip knowledge, that is the ability to recall information quickly and accurately, it means that their cognitive load is freed up because that process has been automated, and the cognitive load is freed up for higher level thinking. Step 3, read and rehearse. Ask students to read through their knowledge organizers, saying the words, reading through equations, tracking through any visuals. Rehearse using the organizer, asking questions based on the content while students are looking at it. So it's a working document. You're going to quiz them on it as they're reading it. Ask them to do this themselves or in pairs so they're engaging with the information. The idea is that they're not just reading it with passive learning, but they're actively using the information and quizzing their neighbor and themselves. You might even ask them to create their own multiple choice quiz, and I've got a format you might be able to use for that as well. So they come up with a question according to the knowledge organizer information and come up with 4 alternatives, one being the correct answer. Step 4, close or cover for generative recall. So it's all well and good if they're reading this, but if they are just giving you the answers off the knowledge organizer itself, then it kind of misses the point of what we're trying to do here. If we cover over that knowledge organizer, then it's generative recall. So they're generating it from their own minds, from their own memory. And this helps them in the long-term recall of that information. This is an active step. Students need to remove the information from view and engage in a generative recall process, completing a table, listing the bullet points, adding labels to the diagram, placing ideas in the correct sequence, remembering definitions. And finally, step number 5, recheck for accuracy. After a short generative process, students should reveal the covered information to check the accuracy of their recall. So it's a matter of referring back to the knowledge organizer to see if they have come up with the correct information after having read it in the first place in that covering over phase. Repeat steps 4 and 5 in an iterative loop, filling in gaps in knowledge, adding fluency each time until students feel confident that they can recall the information. Again, this can be used in sequences over time. It can be spaced out, and it can refer back to topics from last term, last year. In fact, if we do space it out in that way, studies show that it becomes more effective. When we're thinking about the fact that teaching is experimental, I get a big buzz when I think about things that I don't do, new theories and approaches to teaching that I think about how to implement into my own practice and how to develop in the classroom. And chances are it's not going to be 100% successful the first time. The idea that teaching should be experimental, we should always be changing and adapting it to certain situations, certain classes and certain contexts. So then comes the refreeze section of the process. So we're going to begin thinking quite critically about, first of all, what we did in the first place. Secondly, how we implemented it in the classroom. And then at this point, we're thinking about the strengths of what it is that we implemented in the classroom. So we're going to think about the good things that we did, the ways in which that thing was successful. The other thing we're going to think about, and perhaps more importantly, is the ways in which we can improve that approach as well. Okay, so not only in what ways was it a very, very strong approach, but in what ways we can improve it. This might even involve going back to the drawing board, having a look at the knowledge organisers, redrafting it, having a colleague look at the knowledge organiser, sorting out the format of it, the content of it, anything that is required in order to make it more effective. Review the process that we've been talking about in this talk. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to melt. So we're going to look critically at our own practice. What is it that we do? What is it that we don't do? And in what ways can we improve? We're going to move on to mold. So we're going to learn some new information and see what we can do to add that new knowledge into our practice. Once we've done that, we're going to be thinking about this process here, the refreezing. How do we assure consistency in our approach? Now, rest assured, everybody, that there will be no observations on this due to the COVID era, etc., etc. It will be a matter of each and every individual classroom practitioner sitting down in a quiet moment after the lesson and thinking about what the strengths were to that particular approach and the ways in which it can be improved. Of course, every teacher can use a critical friend, a colleague, an assistant head of faculty or a head of faculty, or just someone they trust to chew over the more minute details of the way that looked in the classroom and what could be improved about it. Keeping in mind as well that each time you do this, it's not going to be perfect from the first time you do it, and there is going to be an element of of improvement and going around the process perhaps 2 or 3 different times. The idea that you might have to go back to the drawing board, look at the content or the format of that knowledge organizer, talk to a colleague about it, get a fresh pair of eyes on the situation, and then rehash that knowledge organizer or the way in which you do things, go back onto the mold phase of it, and then back to refreeze as many times as you believe as a practitioner is required in order for you to get it as fully perfect as you possibly can. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to my talk.